I still remember that day clearly when I first stepped into the hostel. The tall, old building carried a strange silence, with long corridors that echoed every footstep and doors that seemed to hold 100 secrets behind them. I wasn't used to this environment yet. Everything felt both exciting and unsettling at the same time. Living away from home was supposed to mean freedom, but freedom also came with loneliness, and I was beginning to feel the weight of that emptiness. As I settled in, meeting different students, most of them seemed distant, wrapped in their own little worlds. But then, there was one boy who stood out among all. He wasn't just friendly, he had a charm that pulled people in without effort. His smile carried an ease, his words carried confidence, and his presence carried a mystery I couldn't quite place. Whenever he spoke, I found myself listening a little too closely, watching a little too carefully. That evening, as I walked past the common area, I found him leaning casually against the wall, as if he had been waiting. "You look lost," he said with a half-smile, his eyes observing me in a way that made me feel both nervous and strangely safe. I laughed lightly, brushing off the awkwardness, but inside my heart was already beating faster than usual. He asked me about my classes, about where I came from, and we talked as though we had known each other for a long time. The conversation felt easy, effortless, but underneath it all, I could sense something else, something he wasn't saying out loud. When he finally said it, it caught me off guard. "Why don't you spend the night in my room?" he asked, as if it were the most natural invitation in the world. His voice was calm, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I froze, unsure how to react. No one had ever asked me something so direct, and a storm of thoughts rushed into my mind. What would people say? What if someone found out? But another thought crept in quietly. What if I said yes? I smiled nervously, trying to disguise my hesitation. My instinct screamed at me to walk away, to ignore him, to protect myself. But there was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at me, that kept me standing there longer than I should have. He didn't push, didn't pressure. He simply let his words linger in the air, letting me decide. And that silence felt louder than any argument. As the night approached, I found myself pacing in my room, debating with myself over and over again. Every reason not to go was clear and strong, yet the temptation of curiosity was even stronger. It wasn't about him entirely. It was about the thrill of stepping into the unknown, of breaking away from the rules I had always followed. The hostel lights flickered dimly, voices echoed faintly from down the hall, and in that moment I made a decision that I knew I couldn't take back. When I finally walked to his door, my heart was racing, my hands cold with nervousness. He opened it before I even knocked, as if he knew I would come. Inside, his room was quiet, the air heavy with an anticipation that neither of us voiced. He smiled faintly, moving aside to let me in, and I stepped into a space that felt like crossing a line between two worlds, the safe one I had always known, and the forbidden one waiting on the other side. We talked for a while about everything and nothing, the kind of small talk that hides deeper meanings beneath casual words. The clock ticked slowly, every minute pulling me further into a space where hesitation no longer mattered. I could feel the weight of the choice I had made, and though guilt whispered in the back of my mind, curiosity spoke louder. That night didn't begin with anything dramatic. It began with silence, with glances that lasted too long, with laughter that felt forced but soon turned genuine. It began with the slow realization that I had willingly placed myself in a situation that was both thrilling and dangerous. And though a part of me still wanted to run back to the safety of my own room, I stayed. I stayed because something inside me wanted to know what it meant to step outside the boundaries I had always lived within. I stayed because his presence made me forget, even for a moment, the fear of consequences. And as the night stretched longer, the reality of my choice became heavier, though I pushed it aside, telling myself that morning was still far away. The room felt different once the door was shut. The faint light from the small lamp on the desk threw soft shadows across the walls, and in that dimness everything seemed slower, quieter, more secretive. My heart was still restless, but as he began speaking again, his voice softened the edges of my nerves. He didn't speak with the kind of urgency I expected, Instead, he told stories about his life, about nights he had spent alone, about how the hostel sometimes felt more like a cage than a home. His honesty surprised me. It was as though he wanted me to see him, not just the boy everyone else thought they knew. We sat on opposite sides of the bed at first, as though some invisible line kept us apart. The conversation shifted between lighthearted jokes and serious confessions, and slowly, that line began to blur. Every time he leaned a little closer, every time his eyes held mine for a fraction longer than necessary, I felt the space between us shrinking. It wasn't just about the words we exchanged. It was about the silences in between, the unspoken understanding that something more was waiting beneath the surface. The hostel outside was alive with muffled sounds, laughter echoing down the corridor, footsteps, doors opening and shutting, but inside his room, it felt like another world altogether. A world where time moved differently. I caught myself glancing at the door more than once, nervous that someone might walk in, that someone might discover us. But at the same time, a part of me was strangely exhilarated by the secrecy. The risk only seemed to heighten the connection building between us. At one point, he leaned back against the wall, looking at me with a smile that wasn't playful but something deeper, something I couldn't quite read. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said quietly, almost as if he was testing my resolve. His words should have given me an exit, a chance to escape the guilt that had already started tugging at me. Yet, instead of leaving, I found myself leaning in just a little closer, as if my silence was an answer on its own. That was the moment when everything began to shift. The air seemed heavier, filled with tension we both could feel but didn't dare to speak of. I tried to distract myself by asking him about his family, about his plans for the future, and he answered with the same openness he had shown earlier. But every now and then, his gaze would linger on me in a way that said far more than his words. And every time, I felt my defenses weaken. I told myself that nothing had really happened yet, that it was just a conversation, just two people sharing a night. But deep down, I knew better. The kind of closeness we were creating wasn't innocent. It was dangerous, tempting, and already pulling me into a place I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I could feel the weight of betrayal hanging in the background, even if I tried to ignore it. The hours slipped by almost unnoticed. The clock ticked toward midnight, but instead of growing tired, I felt more awake than ever. His presence was intoxicating, making me forget the world outside that door. The thought of someone finding us, of questions I couldn't answer, kept surfacing in my mind, but each time I pushed it down, burying it beneath the growing connection we shared. At one point, the silence between us grew so heavy that I thought I should speak, say anything to break it. But he spoke first. "You know, sometimes the things we regret the most are the ones we never dared to do," he said softly. His words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. They carried both danger and possibility, and I wasn't sure which side I wanted to choose. I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the intensity, but my voice betrayed me, trembling slightly. He noticed it was impossible for him not to, and instead of pulling away, he leaned closer, his expression serious now. That closeness made my heart pound so hard it felt like the whole room could hear it. In that moment, I realized I was standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything about how I saw myself, how I lived with myself after this night. And yet, despite the fear, despite the guilt, I didn't move away. I stayed, caught in the pull of something I couldn't resist. The room seemed to close in on us, the walls shrinking, the outside world disappearing. It was just him and me, and the secrets we were about to create. A night that began with hesitation was slowly turning into something far more dangerous, and I could feel myself slipping deeper into it, unable, or maybe unwilling, to stop. The silence in the room had become almost unbearable, heavy with things neither of us dared to say out loud. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest, faster than I wanted to admit, and every time his eyes met mine, it was like they were asking a question I didn't know how to answer. The air between us was charged, fragile, and yet irresistible. I told myself I should get up, walk back to my room, close the door behind me, and forget this night ever happened. But my body wouldn't move. My thoughts were tangled between fear and curiosity, guilt and desire. It was as though I had already crossed an invisible boundary the moment I agreed to stay, and now the line kept blurring until I could no longer tell where safety ended and danger began. He shifted closer, not hurried, not demanding, just steady, as though giving me time to stop him if I wanted to. But I didn't. I stayed still, caught in the intensity of his presence. My breathing grew shallow, and I could hear the faint creaks of the hostile building outside, the footsteps in the hall, the occasional murmur of voices. Every sound made me anxious, yet it only deepened the secrecy of the moment. No one could know. No one should ever know. When he finally reached out, it wasn't sudden or forceful. It was careful, deliberate, as if he too was aware of the line we were crossing. A shiver ran through me, not just from fear but from the realization that this was real, that there would be no going back once I let it happen. A part of me screamed against it, reminding me of promises, of values, of the life I had outside these four walls. But another part, the one I had buried for so long, whispered that this was what I wanted, even if only for a fleeting moment. The clock ticked louder in my ears. Time stretched and twisted, turning minutes into something heavier. I felt the weight of every second pressing down on me, reminding me that choices always come with consequences. And yet, in that small, enclosed room, it was easy to forget the outside world. Easy to believe that the night belonged only to us. As the hours slipped by, the sense of secrecy grew thicker. My thoughts swirled with images of what might happen if someone discovered us, if a friend knocked on the door, if rumors spread. The fear of exposure was sharp, but strangely, it only made the night more intoxicating. Every glance, every movement carried a thrill of danger. We were both aware of it, yet neither of us pulled back. At one point, I caught my reflection faintly in the darkened window across the room. For a split second, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. The girl who had always lived by rules, who had always chosen the safe path, was no longer there. Instead, I saw someone daring, reckless, someone willing to risk her peace of mind for the heat of a forbidden night. That realization both terrified me and drew me in further. He noticed my silence, the way my thoughts were running wild. "You're thinking too much," he said gently, almost with a knowing smile. And he was right. My mind was a battlefield of reasons and excuses, but my heart had already chosen its side. I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. The way I stayed, the way I let the moment unfold, was answer enough. It was strange how quickly the night consumed me. What began with hesitation had turned into a reality I couldn't deny. The betrayal I feared was no longer a distant possibility. It had become a part of me, stitched into the very fabric of that night. I felt both powerful and powerless at once. Powerful for daring to step beyond my boundaries, powerless because I knew I was too far in to turn back. By the time the clock neared dawn, the weight of it all began to sink in. I felt a heaviness in my chest that wasn't there before. The thrill that had carried me through the night was slowly giving way to something else, guilt, sharp and relentless, whispering that the morning would not be kind. Still, I remained by his side, unable to undo what had already been done. The hostel was silent now, the voices and footsteps gone, replaced by the quiet of early morning. I knew that soon the world outside his room would wake, that reality would come knocking, and with it the questions I wasn't ready to answer. But for that last stretch of the night, I let myself exist in the silence, torn between regret and a strange, lingering sense of fulfillment. And as the first hint of light began to seep through the curtains, I understood that the night had changed me. I wasn't the same person who had walked into his room. I'd stepped into a secret, crossed a line I could never uncross, and the weight of that choice would follow me long after I left. The first light of dawn crept slowly through the thin curtains, painting the room in pale shades of gray. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the silence, pretending the night had not happened. But the weight in my chest was undeniable, pressing harder with every breath. Reality had returned, unforgiving and sharp, and I knew the moment I stepped out of that room. everything would feel different. He stirred beside me, calm and unbothered, as though the night had been nothing more than a natural part of his life. His ease made me feel even more restless. How could he appear so steady when I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted forever? I tried to match his composure, forcing a faint smile when he looked at me, but inside, I was unraveling. The room that had felt like a sanctuary hours ago now felt suffocating. Every corner seemed to whisper what had happened, every shadow holding a reminder of choices I couldn't erase. My thoughts spun in circles. What if someone had seen me entering? What if rumors spread through the hostel? What if this moment followed me beyond these walls? The more I thought, the heavier my heart became. I sat quietly, waiting for the courage to stand up and leave, but my body resisted. Part of me didn't want to move, didn't want to face the reality outside that door. If I stayed here, maybe it would remain a secret, a memory shared only between the two of us. But I knew better. Secrets have a way of weighing down the soul, no matter how carefully they are kept. He spoke softly, as though sensing my turmoil. You don't need to overthink. It was just one night. His words, meant to comfort, pierced me instead. Just one night. Could something that felt so heavy to me mean so little to him? Or was he only trying to ease the guilt he saw in my eyes? I didn't ask. I couldn't. The answers might hurt more than the silence. I finally stood, the floor cold under my feet, the room colder now that morning had stripped it of its mystery. He watched me without protest, without questions, as if he knew this was how it had to end. For a fleeting second, I wanted him to stop me, to tell me it meant more, that it wasn't just another secret night to be forgotten. But he didn't. And maybe that was the answer I had been avoiding. As I opened the door, the hallway stretched before me, empty and quiet, yet filled with 1,000 invisible eyes. Each step back to my room felt heavier than the last, my body tense, as though someone might appear and catch me in the act of returning. The door to my own room had never felt so far away. When I finally reached it and slipped inside, I leaned against it, closing my eyes, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Alone again, the silence was deafening. My bed, my books, my belongings, they all seemed unchanged. Yet I wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, replaying the night over and over again in my mind. The laughter, the closeness, the secrecy, all of it felt unreal now, like a dream I wasn't sure I had actually lived. And yet, the guilt in my chest was proof enough. I wondered what this night would mean in the days to come. Would it fade into memory, just as he had suggested, becoming nothing more than a secret no one would ever know? Or would it linger, carving itself into my conscience, a reminder of the moment I chose temptation over reason? I wasn't sure which fate frightened me more, the idea of forgetting or the certainty of never forgetting. As the hostel came alive with the sounds of morning, doors opening, voices echoing down the corridors, I pulled the blanket over my shoulders and closed my eyes. I knew I would have to face the day, act as if nothing had changed, smile when spoken to, and hide the storm inside me. No one could know the truth. No one could know how I had allowed one night to reshape the way I saw myself. It wasn't love, not really. It wasn't even something I could name clearly. It was a moment born out of loneliness, temptation, and curiosity, a moment that had taken more from me than I had been ready to give. And now, all I was left with was the weight of silence, the memory of shadows, and the knowledge that choices, once made, cannot be undone. That night at the hostel would remain a secret forever, a secret between him and me, locked away in the quiet corners of memory. But deep inside, I knew it had changed me. It had shown me the thin line between desire and regret, between freedom and consequence. And as I sat in the stillness of my room, I realized I would carry that lesson with me, no matter how much I wished I could leave it behind.